Upon prestiging for the first time, quite a few new challenges unlock, and one such category of challenges is for the lethals. I just recently covered the Fire Discipline challenge, which will be linked in the description as well as the outro. The next most requested lethal challenge has gotta be Chophouse. Equip 2 combat axes and get a kill with the first throw of each combat axe in one life 5 times. The reward for completing this challenge is a calling card that depicts some sort of ram demon who appears to be wearing a butcher's apron and dual wielding some nasty looking cleavers. It looks like something straight out of Doom. This challenge sounds far worse than it actually is. I think the biggest obstacle for this challenge is getting used to the combat axe itself. Hardly anyone uses it, as it's a relatively late unlock. Not only this, it's painfully slow to deploy. Unlike the throwing items in previous Call of Duty games, the combat axe cannot be drawn instantly. When the lethal grenade button is held, you'll first lower your gun as if your player was about to bring out a grenade. In a fast-paced game where enemies can slide around a corner or jump over your head, you'd assume that the combat axe would have been made more viable. What's worse is that there's no perk in this game that specifically allows you to throw equipment faster. You'd think that the Fast Hands perk would offer this trait, but the description does not mention it at all. Despite this though, Fast Hands does reduce the throwing speed by a very minuscule amount. Without Fast Hands, from the start of the throw animation to the first frame after the release is 0.417 seconds. And with Fast Hands, it's decreased to 0.350 seconds. Even when making these clips as slow as possible, it was very hard to tell a difference. So a hit from the combat axe inflicts 125 damage, meaning it's always an instant kill in any normal game modes, regardless of where the hit registered on an enemy. One benefit to using the combat axe is its retrieval process. There's 2 ways to retrieve a thrown axe. First, simply walking over the combat axe, or the body the combat axe was thrown at will return it to your inventory. It's highlighted in a bright yellow color, making retrieval very easy. You can even see the yellow outline through walls, similar to how the Engineer perk tags equipment in bright orange. The second retrieval method is via the Scavenger perk. Upon killing an enemy with anything other than an explosive, a scavenger bag will drop. Simply walk over a bag to replenish your combat axe. I think another issue some people face with these more difficult challenges is that they don't go all in when attempting to do it. Instead of focusing all their efforts on the challenge at hand, they become more worried about damaging their KD ratios or going negative. If you want to get through these as fast as possible, you can't have that type of mentality. With that said, let's do a quick class setup. For a weapon, you'll want to pick something that you're comfortable using with no attachments at all. My personal preference would be any of the shotguns. Next, you'll obviously need 2 combat axes, which requires the Danger Close wildcard. For a tactical item, we have 2 ideal choices: the shock charge or the concussion grenade. If you saw my Sticky Bomber challenge guide, you'll know that I tested each and every tactical piece of equipment to see which held the enemy in check the longest. The shock charge can immobilize an enemy for approximately 2 seconds. The concussion grenade, on the other hand, lasts all the way up to 4.683 seconds. Despite this, I've got justification for using the shock charge over the concussion grenade, which I'll explain in just a bit. If you're too low of a level and don't have the shock charge unlocked, go with the concussion grenade. The next essential perk is Gung Ho. For some reason, a lot of people seem to forget about this perk when using the combat axe. It's actually invaluable. So with Gung Ho, you're allowed to essentially cock the combat axe back and move about the map as normal. You can sprint, jump, and even slide. Without Gung Ho, however, it's a different story. You can no longer sprint or even slide, which means you'll be moving at the pace of someone who just shat their pants. That awkward diarrhea dribbling down your leg, corncob up your ass pace. You don't want that. The other tier 3 perk is Tactical Mask. Regardless as to whether you use the shock charge or the concussion grenade, you don't want to get caught in your own ill effects. Wearing Tac Mask essentially guarantees that if you get caught in your own blast radius, you'll be no worse for wear. For tier 2, you'll want the Scavenger perk. As I mentioned earlier, walking over a scavenger bag will replenish a lost combat axe without having to retrieve the actual axe itself. This will also replenish our tactical item. In tier 1, you'll want the Overclock perk so that we can earn our specialist ability faster. And speaking of which, the most logical choice for this particular challenge is Firebreak's Heat Wave. It's essentially a super concussion grenade that can slow your enemies for up to 2.7 seconds. So naturally, this can be quite handy. So there's the Chophouse class setup. Now let's talk tactics. As the challenge states, you have to successfully land your first throw of each combat axe. There's 2 ways to use the combat axe. the 300 kills method, and the Chophouse method. For the 300 kills method, you basically spam the combat axe at every given opportunity, obviously not caring about your accuracy. For the Chophouse method, we want to slow things down considerably, taking our time to utilize our environment and equipment to our advantage. The concept is simple. Set traps with shock charges in narrow hallways and wait patiently. It's the spider and web tactic. Sooner or later, some black sock wearing Wiswog is going to come barreling around a corner and set off one of your shock charges. If you're waiting in anticipation with your combat axe already drawn back and ready to chuck, you can simply walk right up to them and cold cock them into oblivion. And this is why I suggested the shock charge over the concussion grenade. The set it and forget it mentality is much more ideal than having to chuck a grenade and then run up to them and plant your axe in their face. You're typically at a distance when throwing a concussion grenade, whereas with the shock charge, you can be lying in wait for your prey to get caught in your web of destruction. It is also possible to run and gun with shock charges, throwing them as you advance on your enemies as opposed to lying in wait. I much prefer the spider and web approach, but to each their own. You'll want to utilize Heatwave to catch your enemies off guard. While they're struggling to decide whether to go prone or hop around like a frog, you can easily circle behind them and plant a combat axe straight up their ass. Patience is the ultimate ingredient for success in this Chophouse recipe. Remember, if you miss with your first throw of either combat axe, you'll have to die to reset the challenge. Ideally, if you use the spider and web tactic, you should be able to easily approach your incapacitated target at a relatively close distance and land an easy throw. Just don't blow your load too early. That usually was my downfall. I'd easily land my first throw by striking a shock-charged enemy, but then another enemy would round the corner and I'd jump the gun and panic throw my knife. You can't afford to be careless with your throws, considering precision is of the utmost importance. For game modes, I'd highly recommend free-for-all. Not only does this allow for the fastest recharge time for your Heatwave ability, but it ensures teammates don't gank your kills. There was nothing more frustrating to catch an enemy in a shock charge trap or Heatwave their face off, only to get the kill stolen right in front of me before I could chuck my combat axe. You'll also constantly find enemy encounters due to the chaotic spawns, whereas in other game modes, you may have to traverse quite a bit of the map in order to get an ideal engagement. Again though, play it very cautiously. You'll want to hold down tight hallways and corridors that you know enemies will be flocking to by placing shock charges at the entrances. Landing the first combat axe is the easy part. It's regrouping and resetting your traps and successfully hitting the second axe that makes this challenge a bit more frustrating. To lessen the frustration, try to set your shock charge traps when you also have the Heatwave ability in reserve. That way, should a second enemy rapidly approach, you'll have the means to deal with him as well. You only have to do this 5 times, so it's not overly time consuming. I completed the challenge in just 2 free-for-all games, and by no means am I a pro at chucking axes. In fact, I actually had the worst luck imaginable. Typically, the free-for-all game mode is filled with lesser skilled players, but occasionally you'll find some nasty pub stomping fanatics in there. In the game where I completed the challenge, I was hovering around a 3 KD even with my Chophouse class, which just goes to show how lesser skilled the competition was. And then, all of a sudden, YouTuber I'm Marksman joined the lobby and absolutely lit me up. If you're not familiar with who this is, he has nearly 400,000 subscribers, and he's more of a search and destroy content creator. But he clearly knew how to dominate a game of free-for-all. Regardless, I still had the most success in the free-for-all game mode, which is why I recommend it. And that, as they say, is that. You'll want to use shock charges and the Heatwave ability to set spiderweb-like traps to immobilize your prey. As they struggle to break free, you should be able to get close enough to land a fatal strike with your combat axe. Repeat this process a second time to ensure the notch registers towards the challenge. And should you miss a throw, you'll need to die to reset the challenge attempt. You must land each combat axe on the first throw. You'll want to try to actively engage enemies in small hallways or rooms rather than wide open areas. This will help ensure you land your throws with precision. If all else fails, just hurl 2 combat axes to the sky in frustration at the start of every round, and you may just get lucky.